I just would be interested overall, what are your thoughts on the way that Jill Stein has been treated by the corporate media following the 2016 election?
Well, I was part of an advisory group to Jill, and I advised her not to go to that RT thing.
Why?
And in fact, well, I thought it was a setup. RT is, Russian propaganda. There's a lot of good programming on it, and they don't really interfere with that. Chris Hedges, Larry King, I don't know if Larry's still on there, Tom Hartman. But there's also, when the news comes from central headquarters, they get all kinds of crazy conspiracy people on there. Old LaRouche people, the Lyndon LaRouche,
right.
Conspiracy people and others. So I didn't trust them. And actually another person said, they could take a picture that would just overshadow everything you say. And she thought she'd give a message. She was encouraged by a lot of people in the peace movement. So she went. And that picture, Putin, you said she sat down with Putin. No, Putin sat down at the table with her for just a few minutes.
Right.
Picture snapped. Flynn is there. She don't know Flynn. Nobody knows Flynn. And Putin leaves. And then Sputnik International, another state media, puts it out on the media. And then, what's their purpose? Divide us in this country. The liberals from the more radical elements. And then MSNBC, CNN, Fox put that picture out there, and a lot of print media, again and again and again. They're doing it for Russian propaganda. That was what the Russians wanted. I mean, it's so ironic. The media is, they're following this RussiaGate thing, which I think is serious. I think Trump ought to be impeached. I think it's obvious he saw collusion. He did collude. Him and his son and his son-in-law, and it's all over that first volume of the Mueller Report. It's all over there. I mean, when people say, "Oh, it showed no collusion," no, it didn't. It says, Mueller says right away, "I didn't talk about collusion. I talked about narrow legal definition of conspiracy. Plus, I can't indict a president according to this OLC letter in the Justice Department." He just laid out the evidence for prosecutors, which has to be Congress, and so I think that's all serious, but. MSNBC, CNN, Fox, from their different points of view, they're totally obsessed with that. And that's all about getting eyes on their screen to sell their advertising. And big important stories are being totally neglected. The climate crisis, the new nuclear arms race, Venezuela, Iran, right now we're, debating whether we're going to war. Well, we're not debating, it's not in the media, it's basically Congress kind of nervously looking at, John Bolton and Elliot Abrams, and whether they're going to push Trump into a war that Trump doesn't even seem to want in Iran. Trump has said he wants to go into Venezuela. He said that'd be a good war. We can grab their oil. Those kind of stories are not being covered, and that's a problem with the media. And they like simplistic descriptions of the Green Party. Yeah, okay, they split the vote. That's like all they can say. Nothing about the program we advance. And that's a problem. And I think we got to do two things about it. One is we got to have our own media. You're doing it with this podcast. Social media. We just got to be our own media because we're not going to get fair coverage. We just ran a race in New York for governor, attorney general, comptroller. And our attorney general candidate had a press secretary who was a former TV anchor. The attorney general candidate is probably the most prominent civil rights lawyer. He's an environmental lawyer, public corruption lawyer. Had been covered by the New York Times for 35 years. And so this TV anchor calls up the Times and says, "Man, you're not giving my guy any coverage." And the reporter said back, "Yeah, we made a decision. We're not covering the Greens this year." I got 5% of the vote for governor 4 years ago. That's more than any independent candidate on the left for a party got in a century. Those kind of editorial decisions are totally irresponsible. So then, besides doing our own media, we got to have a program of media reform. We got to break up these big six media conglomerates. They own entertainment, news, which is really infotainment, print media, and then in local broadcast markets, they own multiple radio and TV stations. Clear Channels has 1,200 radio stations at least around the country now, and mostly it's 24/7 right-wing talk and commentary radio. We need to, break up the conglomerates, restore limits on ownership, one owner per broadcaster. We want diverse ownership and points of view. We need doctrines that the FEC should reinstate to make sure that there's enough public affairs broadcasting and that it's fair. It gives all points of view. Those kinds of things. And then we need a public broadcasting sector that's really public. I mean, now PBS, I think one of the Koch brothers is on their board. Ralph Nader had a column out in the last month or two where he counted the number of commercials on an NPR news broadcast versus MSNBC. And there were more on NPR. And those are ads. It's not just sponsored by. So the media thing is, it's basically become a propaganda operation of big business in alliance with the government. And so we need a whole program of media reform. And that's something that really hasn't become a big campaign issue, but it needs to be. I think the closest thing we got is Elizabeth Warren saying, let's break up the tech companies so they aren't owning multiple platforms.
I believe Tulsi Gabbard said the same thing.
Okay, good. Well, now we need to look at TV, radio, and print. And print media, because of the social media, is having a hard time surviving economically. I think it needs public subsidies. When we founded the Republic, we gave them subsidized postal rates so that people could get newspapers and pamphlets. That is certainly a role of government. And, journalism is they call it the fourth estate. It's as important. And Jefferson famously said, if I had to choose between, newspapers and government, I'd choose newspapers. It's like, it's essential to a democracy. So that's a whole area that's not got enough discussion that we need to bring up.
So on the RussiaGate thing again, some of the journalists who I've spoken with, they've really been critical, independent journalists, they've been critical of how the media has obsessed over RussiaGate and used it as a backlash both against independent media, which you see from Facebook and Twitter and YouTube cracking down at independent media, kind of under this umbrella of RussiaGate. And also, because of some of the Facebook ads that were run, also against Black Lives Matter. We saw that with Jill Stein, the hysteria that was unleashed against the Green Party because of that photo. So do you think that the media has kind of obsessed and hyperventilated about RussiaGate to the detriment of the left? Or do you think that we should be concerned about Russian interference in our elections?
Well, we should. I mean, you just named a couple examples. It's all over that first volume of the Mueller Report. But the obsession is a problem, too. It's not really about Russia. It's about Trump. Everybody wants to know what Trump's doing. He's the reality TV show that everybody's watching. And for a lot of people, it's what are we going to do about Trump? So far, impeachment, he should have been impeached right away. He's violating the first minute he took office, the Emoluments Clause. And then the racism, he's unfit for office. That was the first article that James Green from Texas. He has the same name as the singer. I'm forgetting what his singer's first name was. But anyway, Representative Green, he was not representing all the people. There's that guy, from sexual assault to, racial discrimination, in his history, bank fraud, insurance fraud, not paying his workers, wage theft, not paying his contractors. I mean, this guy is unbelievable coming into office, and now since he's been in office, the Emoluments Clause, telling agencies to violate the law, like on the immigration question. So he's lawless. All kinds of obstruction of justice and tampering with witnesses, contempt of Congress. I mean, he makes Nixon look like a saint. And the Democrats say, we got to do investigations. Man, they're going to investigate. I think it's cynical. I think they want Trump in there so they can raise money against him. We should be smarter consumers of social media. I mean, I think education is a big part of that. How you regulate what goes on social media. I'm really worried about censorship. And look, it wasn't just the Russians. The Israelis They had one of their intelligence psyops guy in a meeting with the Trump people, along with Emiratis and Saudis. The Emiratis and Saudis want to give them $2 million, which is totally illegal. And the Israeli guy said, I can do social media for you. And that hasn't been investigated much. And some of the independent media like The Intercept reported on it, The Progressive reported on it. But Mueller didn't look into that, There's probably more there than we know about. David K. Johnston, Pulitzer Prize winning former New York Times reporter, particularly on tax issues, covered Trump. He's written books about Trump. He has lots of evidence that, Trump was laundering money for the drug cartels down in South America. And that's where he got his money when he was in real trouble. I mean, his helicopter driver was a convicted cocaine smuggler who got, off on a light sentence. At one point was in front of his sister, Judge Trump, she's got another last name. There's so much dirt at that level. I think another reason they don't go after Trump so much is that there's so much corporate crime on the Democratic side. And it was so soft on it after the Great Recession. So, RussiaGate is really about corporate crime, public corruption, foreign influence, and basically, is Congress now just a sounding board? Are we like, these dictatorial countries that have nominally elected bodies like Turkey now with Erdogan, where, the elected body really doesn't have power? I think we really ought to go the other way, more like a parliamentary system. You elect your people's assembly, representative body, and then they elect the executive branch and can hold them accountable on short notice. That's Germany does that, UK does that, Canada does that. Sometimes they have independently elected presidents who are head of state but not head of the government, so they're not involved in the administration. They're more almost like it's really like a monarchy, sort of symbolically representing the government. Mm-hmm. I think the presidency is a hangover from the monarchical age, and so that never gets discussed. I remember in 2000 that Green Party USA platform. There were two platforms that came out that year. Both parties endorsed Nader, but in that platform we called for abolition of the Senate as an aristocratic body, undemocratic. 2 voters per state, no matter what the population, 2 senators per state. And Ralph called me and said, I don't want to talk about that. It's not my main issue. And then I got called by Roll Call, this publication out of Washington. Would you write about abolishing the U.S. Senate? Which I did, but I had to say in my first sentence, Ralph Nader doesn't support it, but this one faction of the Green Party adopted a plank. And then I explained why it'd be a good idea. And I still think it would be.
Not to dwell on RussiaGate too much, but I just have to ask, because when I had Noam Chomsky on the show, he made a point. He voices some skepticism about it, and he was saying, what would the quid pro quo be for Russia? And I think that when you look at U.S. foreign policy and how it's evolved under Trump, we've torn up the INF treaty, we bombed Syria, we're backing this coup in Venezuela, we're selling weapons to the Ukrainians, we're now surrounding Iran. That seems all very adversarial, not just towards Venezuela, Iran, other countries, but also against Russia. So if Trump was colluding with the Kremlin, what has Russia gained from that?
Well, maybe the Republican platform resolution that Manafort got changed, about the Ukraine. But platforms don't mean anything, really. And the national security establishment, so-called deep state, it was there. It's not the conspiracy that, Trump and his people would make it out to be, some people in the FBI trying to stage a coup. That's nonsense. But there is a deep state with inertia. Reagan complained about it. Thatcher complained about it, trying to turn foreign policy in the directions they wanted to. And Trump, he don't really have a foreign policy. He got a slogan, America First. So you don't have to have the quid pro quo where they got together and plotted. I think more he was played by the Russians, a useful idiot. They figured they could do more with him than they could with Clinton. So they had an interest. I think they definitely want him to elect. I think that's pretty clear. It doesn't mean they, said, let's make a deal and we'll do this if you do that. But they still, they obviously intervened. And, that's a problem. And it's a problem for a candidate to accept that.